Thank you both for those presentations. And since I'm here with the microphone at the moment, I'm going to ask the first question, the privilege of being the moderator, and then I'll open it up to the audience. This question could be answered by either or both of you. I was interested at the city level, rather than focusing on economic development in the traditional sense, if either of you have some insights on how local government can help to build an economic foundation, or maybe, as Julian, as you referred to, a better social foundation that would increase resilience and decrease dependence on the business as usual economy, particularly for more marginalized groups.
I didn't quite catch the last part of that.
Sorry, I can repeat it. So rather than focusing on economic development in a traditional sense from a city perspective, how can local governments help build an economic foundation that would increase resilience and decrease dependence on the business as usual economy?
Yeah, great question. I mean, it's quite obvious that a lot of people are excluded from, from the sort of the standard economy, and that a lot of people, and certainly in rural areas, exist in other economies. You go to somewhere like South Africa, especially, and the townships, exist way outside the normal economy. And I think it's incumbent on cities to look at ways of developing communal sharing platforms which don't necessarily operate within the formal economy, but operate on the basis of capabilities and skills. And I know that this kind of thing has problems with issues of taxation, but there are some. What we're doing at the moment is valuing the formal economy through sharing, whereas a lot of cities are doing very good things in trying to enable skill shares and shares that are not based within the formal economy. And so I think as part of what I mentioned in terms of doing an inventory or an audit or an asset mapping of cities, let's look at what the capabilities are. I was recently approached by a bunch of young African-American men here in Cambridge who really have noticed what's happening with the growth of the biotech cluster here next to MIT. They and their families have lived next to that, and there's incredible growth in formal wealth. And they've been asking, what can we do? Because our community is changing. How can we get involved in planning in a way that helps us maintain, our community, but also, betters our community in a way that is not gentrifying. And so, so that I think there are people that want to develop outside. I mean, obviously, you have to have a foot in the formal economy, but there are some people, even young disenfranchised men, can see that there are other ways to develop their skills than just in the formal economy. So I think this notion of asset mapping, looking at capabilities, doing assessments of community organizations, I think that's the way to go.
Dr. Holt, do you have anything to add to that question, or should we?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, just very quickly. I mean, we talked about this a little bit in the setup, Lindsey. But the economic development models in cities have been critiqued a lot because it's just, it's in the U.S. cities competing against each other to, offer tax incentives to get companies to come in. So the question is, where can you take that quote unquote economic development money? And there's also money usually from city foundations and stuff that are really concerned with the economic well-being of the Eugenes and other cities. How is there a way to sort of square the circle of economics and well-being of less fortunate and sustainability? And I think in the paper that you received, I think what I propose is very rough, but I think it's, that's directionally where we need to go, that there are, huge sort sort of social welfare deficits, public goods deficits, let's call them, once you get, below the middle class, then the neoliberalism is going to hollow out a lot of, these welfare state elements. So thinking of those public goods as opportunities to develop businesses, really picking up the ones that really drive sustainability, which I tried to point out by doing, audits and, really understanding what the needs are of the city below the top 20 or 30%, and then investing in local, business initiatives that are also, job training and so forth that are models for a local resilient economy. Seemed to me, that's the place to go. And a lot of people have played around with those ideas since the 1960s, of course. But I mean, the problem I think today is it needs to be local and it needs to be focused. Van Jones and others have talked about these ideas, but until the community of funders and advocates and politicians start saying, this is what we're going to do, this is our model, it will never be done. So it's not, it's not a radically new innovation, but I think that's where all signs are pointing, especially today where there's such a deficit of job opportunities for people in Main Street.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to go to the audience now. I'm trying not to be right-hand oriented, so we'll go back here in the back.
Hi, I'm Stephen Moore from the University of Texas. Hi, Julian. I want to go back to the question that Helena asked, because I can see in both of the comments you've made, question needs to be answered. The dots need to be connected. So I'll make an observation from one of the conversations I was in yesterday. And one of the observations made by a colleague at the table was, well, look, you really don't need to talk to people of modest means because they're not really the problem. They're not over-consuming. What we really need to do is to how do we find mechanisms to stop overconsumption at the top? So perhaps you could respond to that and connect the dots.
You want me to go, Julian? You want to go?
Yeah, I'm having real problems hearing the question. Can the moderator...
Let me try again. Is that perhaps this is more clear? So in our discussions yesterday, one of the observations made at our table was that, look, we really don't need to talk to people of modest means because they actually don't consume very much. What we need to do is to find mechanisms to stop overconsumption at the top of the chain. So perhaps that's a way for you to respond to that observation.
So if I understand you right, you're saying that the priority should be stopping the people at the wealthy consuming because they consume more. Is that what, or putting curbs? Is that what you're hinting there?
That's the observation.
Right. Okay. Well, one thing that I'm always stressing to my students when I look at the kind of models of social foundation and environmental ceiling of if you look at the concept of environmental space, which is a similar concept, the idea that there's this sustainable consumption space, and that at the bottom there's a dignity floor, which is kind of like the $2 a day minimum. And then there's a profligacy ceiling above which we should not go. We are, as a nation, very, very good at identifying minima, but we shy away from maxima. We will never say, that is too much, that is profligate. The Swedes and the Norwegians and the Danes are starting to look at notions of what would be a profligate wage. We are always hanging around at the bottom and defining the minimum and punishing those through Victorian policies on the deserving or undeserving poor. So yes, I mean in some ways I think our challenge, if we were to focus our efforts. Our challenge is constraining the consumption of the top X percent, but while also enabling greater consumption at the lower level. When I founded in 1988 the Black Environment Network in the UK, I remember we had a vicar who talked about a speech that had been given by the then Bishop of Chicago. And the Bishop of Chicago said, "Don't talk to me about sustainability. My people need to consume for another 100 years. But when we've consumed the level that you have, then perhaps we'll think about sustainability. But don't offend me by saying that we should rein it in." And so I can see, we are going to have to think about, I don't know what my colleague thinks about this, but here's an interesting messaging issue for the sustainable consumption people and for the sustainability people. The message that the public are getting out there, sustainability means giving up. Well, for a lot of people, that is almost offensive because they don't feel they've got anything to do. So, yes, I agree with, I hope what the intent of the discussion was, that the priority needs to be looking at, curbing the excesses of those who are living 6, 7, and 8, 10 lives.
Yeah, let me, can I just throw in quickly too? I mean, to me, I think that the way you frame the question is not useful, that it's an either or question. That's why I think it's really important to divide up the causes of unsustainability and where they are and where the opportunities are to engage them. And so, certainly the main question today is how to, dramatically decrease carbon emissions and methane, other carbon equivalents as fast as we can. We've got, basically we've got to run up to the Paris COP, and we've got 2 or 3 years. And that's got to be everybody's #1 agenda. And that's why, the macro level for me is how do you get, a $200 per ton carbon tax in the US passed in the next 2 or 3 years. And I think that should be the top of any city's agenda too, because it's, if we don't do that, nothing else matters. And right now, we're not even close. So that's, how can cities contribute to that, I think is an interesting question, given this kind of contradictory finding that I have in my research, where all the ferment of interesting ideas going on in cities and people feel efficacious working in cities because it's local and things change, is actually taking the work away and the focus away from the national and international, and that's key. But that doesn't mean there's also, even once you put a tax on, say you have a $200 a ton tax, you still have all these unsustainable, elements built into markets. They're not just going to go away overnight. It's going to take lots of work to change all the institutions in agriculture and energy markets and so forth. And it's going to take innovation. The focus on less well-off people is that they can actually be the vanguard because they have nothing to gain from business as usual economy. That's the idea, at least. So all three are, I think, necessary.
I think I'm going to take the question here. Right. Make sure to speak right into the mic. Thank you.
Okay, hi. I think what I'm hearing from this conversation this morning is that what Doug mentioned, community economic development, is a very well thought out body of thought that's been around for many years. And Doug, I think I heard you say that if we go back to that and mobilize and to twinge off the moderator's question, what does an economic model look like for communities that are serious about sustainable consumption? It's community economic development model, and then twinning that with some kind of social mobilization that is addressing senior government levels of taxation and market agreements that are preventing communities from having the authority to mobilize in the ways that they see fit to enable citizens to have a good quality of life. So from that perspective, Doug, first of all, have I got you right? And if I do have you right, then Julian, the second piece is embedding the social equity into that community economic development model, which you're very familiar with Mark Moulton's work, for example, on that. Would that be where we need to go? Is that going to be what gets us there? Socially informed community economic development and mobilization to address the federal tax systems that are driving us out over the top with unsustainable development? Is it that simple for us?
Yeah, I mean that sounds good to me. I mean, I don't know whether any of you know the story of the city of Belo Horizonte in Brazil. What Francis Moore-Lappé said was the city that abolished hunger. Well, 20 years ago, in 1994, they basically created their own markets for food in the city. And this is, remember, in a capitalist country, and the city of Belo Horizonte, 2.5 million people, basically colonized the food procurement system of the city and created an alternative. They use less than 2% of the city's budget each year. They developed a price for a set of a basket of commonly used foods. Any private sector retailers that want to sell in the city have to sell to people on benefits at this fixed price, but they can sell at the market price in wealthier neighborhoods. The city developed very progressive school meal policies. They developed policies for empowering women to get into urban agriculture. And I was at a conference hearing this very moving story of a young woman who was, had no skills, but is now farming some city-owned land, which is on long-term to her and her colleagues. She trains other women, and they sell the food organically produced to the daughter's school. Cities can do all kinds of things, intervening in markets. They can envision a better tomorrow. But what really interested me about this whole thing, and I do urge you to look into Belo Horizonte, what interested me was the platform was social justice and food with dignity. And again, I come back to this point. You cannot retrofit social justice. It has to be in there, in the envisioning of the program, the policy, the strategy. It doesn't work to think, oh, the bike scheme is up and running. Our urban ag program is up and running. Whoops, there's no low-income or minority people involved. Let's retrofit some form of... It doesn't work that way. So I also like the idea of the food with dignity. That comes into this scheme, in that the city developed a whole series of people's restaurants. But these are not like food halls. These are beautiful restaurants where the food is at a fixed price. And they're used by people on low incomes, students, graduate students. So, cities can be progressive. And one question that I would like to ask to you, and one recommendation I would make, is look to Latin American cities. We have Belo Horizonte, the city that abolished hunger. We have Porto Alegre, participatory budgeting. We have Medellin, Colombia, which has turned from a crime-infested into one of the most socially innovative cities. We have Bogota, that developed Transmilenio. These are Latin American cities that managed to develop sustainability programs. They don't even call it that. The programs are intensely focused on social equity. But I would argue outcomes very favorable for sustainability. All of the mayors, whether you look at Enrique Peñalosa or Thomas Mockus before him, everything they did was based around access to resources by those who were access to resources. So again, within capitalist systems, we can look at ways of provisioning, ways of services in which cities can take a place.
Thank you, Dr. Agyeman. Dr. Holt, we have about 1 minute left. I'm wondering if you have any closing comments or remarks.
I don't have anything to build on what Julian said. Is there any other last clarifying question that I could respond to from anybody? Or
Thank you. Doug, I really appreciate your 3 levels. I think researchers always need to be operating at those 3 levels, macro, meta, and micro. And also a really terrific paper, very provocative, got me going. I want to push back on one thing, a major point that you made in your paper, which is to concentrate the energy on Main Street. And my pushback here and my argument is that we need to not let any of these sector groups that you've identified off the hook. And I'd start right at the top and I'd say that 0.1% has so much resource, and it just takes a few of those to liberate resources to be able to get work done, and I need to hold them accountable. The Bobos, if you will, I am not ready to let those people off the hook. I think they need to be analyzed, they need to be discussed with. I think that they have so much influence in this culture that they need to be engaged and we need to be studying them. I think the middle class is hugely important. My criticism about your description of the middle class is not the same one that I know from my research. I think you've kind of cherry-picked a particular group of it, and then finally down on those bottom tertile incomes, hugely important because our research shows that there are a number of citizens in that group that live there comfortably, happily, and we need to learn from those people about how that happy, well-defined group can do that and connect all of the dots together to define this equitability across that spectrum.
Yeah, yeah, great points. I agree with everything you say. Let me just throw in one additional strategy that I'm working on as part of this, the macro level, which has to, I agree, at that level has to address the rich, the upper middle class, et cetera. So for instance, the problem with the upper middle class is that we've allowed ourselves to use sustainability as these kind of hollow symbols. And so the strategy for this group that really are the overconsumers of society is to call their bluff and say, if you're a real environmentalist, you really should be out there saying, tax us. We want a $200 per ton tax on carbon so that if I'm going to fly to Europe, I'm going to pay for it. And I think that's just, and I should be, and I will do, I'll consume less. And so I think for each one of those, we have to segment the population and figure out a strategy for each. I totally agree. And I think there's some really interesting ways to address overconsumption, consumerism in the top 25% that are quite different from the usual strategies of, trying to, present more symbols or change their values or other things that people usually think of.
Thank you.
Well, we are at our time. Thank you so much, Dr. Holt and Dr. Agyeman, for furthering our conversation and seeding the next round of plenary discussion, which we'll have here. You're, of course, welcome to join us, but if you have other things that you need to get doing today, I will leave you with many thanks for your work and encourage all of you to, if you haven't already, read the materials in the reading list or check out their blogs. There's really interesting content to further this conversation. So now I'll pass it back to Kelly as we move into the plenary.